Welcome! Today we're diving deep into a single yet incredibly dense verse from the Quran, the 40th verse of Surah Al-Aʿrāf. Honestly, this one verse is like a key that unlocks a whole universe of theological ideas. We're talking about divine judgment, the afterlife, and even the fundamental nature of God's will versus human choice. Our mission here is to go through this methodically, layer by layer, looking at the commentary and making sure we capture every single detail to build a complete picture. So let's get right into it.
Here it is. This is the verse that's going to be the center of our entire study. You can see just from looking at it, it's a powerful and stark declaration of divine justice. We're going to unpack this statement really piece by piece. We're not just going to look at what it says, but what it implies about belief, about our actions, and about the ultimate consequences of both, all through the lens of the detailed commentary we're working from. All right, so here's our roadmap for this analysis. First, we'll lock down the precise meaning and context of the verse itself. Then, we'll explore this idea of the gates of heaven and a really fascinating intermediate realm known as barzakh. After that, we'll decode that famous parable of the camel and the needle. You'll see how that communicates a message of absolute finality. This will naturally lead us to the classic story of Adam and the forbidden tree, which is a perfect case study for understanding disobedience. And finally, we'll tie it all together by tackling the huge philosophical distinction between two different types of divine will. Okay, let's get started with the verse itself. What is this divine declaration actually saying? And, just as importantly, who is it being said to? The language here is incredibly direct, it's uncompromising, and it really sets a severe tone for everything that follows. So the verse specifies two conditions that lead to this severe judgment. First, you have the denial of God's signs or verses. And second, and this is key, you have arrogance towards them. The source commentary really stresses this point. We're not talking about passive disbelief or simple ignorance. This is an active, prideful rejection, a conscious choice to turn away. And the consequence is just as specific and absolute. The gates of heaven are sealed shut, and paradise is declared an impossibility. The verse wraps up by calling this the just recompense for criminals, which frames their actions not as a simple mistake, but as a serious transgression that merits this exact fate. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. The moment you read gates of heaven, a question immediately pops up. When and where are these gates closed? Is this a punishment that only happens after you die, or does it actually start right here, in this life? Are we talking about a physical barrier, or is it something spiritual? The commentary dives into this, and it turns out the answer is multi-layered. You see, it's not a single event. It's more like a total, cumulative, spiritual blockade. The first interpretation suggests that even while they're alive, in this world, the channel for their good deeds to be accepted and for their souls to be elevated is just shut. At the same time, the gates that allow divine mercy, guidance, and blessings to come down to them are also closed, so they're left in a state of spiritual isolation. Then, at the moment of death, the gates to the heavenly part of that intermediate realm, barzakh, are barred. And finally, on the day of resurrection, the gates to paradise itself are sealed to them for good. It's a complete and progressive exclusion from every single aspect of divine grace. You heard me mention that word, barzakh. That's a hugely important concept here. It's a specific theological idea that's directly connected to what happens right after death, way before the final day of judgment. So let's really dig into what this intermediate state is to understand the full weight of the consequences in the verse. So what is barzakh exactly? Well, the word itself literally means a barrier or a partition, something that separates two things. In theology, it's the state of existence for the soul between the moment of physical death and the final resurrection. And what's critical to understand is that it's not some kind of waiting room or soul sleep. No, it's an active, conscious state where a person begins to get a preview of their ultimate destiny, a foretaste of either the bliss of paradise or the agony of hell. It's a realm of the spirit, totally unbound by the physical laws we know. Now, the commentary, drawing from various traditions, explains that barzakh isn't a one-size-fits-all experience. For righteous souls, it's a heavenly state. There's a famous saying from Imam Ali that describes their grave becoming a garden from the gardens of paradise, where their souls ascend to a realm of peace. But for the arrogant deniers our verse is talking about, well, the gates of heaven are closed. Their existence becomes a hellish one. That same tradition describes their grave as a pit from the pits of hell. Their spirits are confined, they're weighed down, they're unable to ascend. So this verse, Al-Aʿrāf 40, is actually used as direct Qur'anic proof for this agonizing state of barzakh. Okay, let's shift gears now to the second part of the verse's declaration. It's this vivid, unforgettable image that's used to describe just how impossible it is for these individuals to enter paradise.
and it's a statement of absolute, total finality.
The Arabic phrase is hatta yalija al-jamalu fi sami al-khiyat. This is such a powerful literary device. It's a classic expression meant to describe something that isn't just hard or unlikely, but completely and fundamentally impossible. I mean, the image is so visceral. You have the largest common animal of that region trying to squeeze through one of the tiniest man-made openings. The total absurdity of that picture is the entire point.
So here's the bottom line. The verse isn't setting up some kind of crazy, extraordinary challenge they have to meet. It's using a universally understood metaphor for never gonna happen to issue a final, irreversible, divine decree. For those who combine denial with arrogance, that path to paradise is permanently sealed. There's no gray area, no loophole. The judgment is absolute. Now, to get a better handle on the nature of the crime being punished here, this arrogant disobedience, the commentary takes us back to a foundational case study, the story of Adam, Eve, and the forbidden tree. This event is absolutely essential for understanding the different kinds of divine commands and the very nature of what it means to transgress. For centuries, scholars have debated this. What was that tree? Was the prohibition literal, about a physical tree with a specific fruit, or was the tree a symbol for something more abstract, like a temptation or a concept? The source text we're looking at carefully lays out several of the fascinating interpretations that have been proposed over time. As you can see right here in the source text, the debate is incredibly rich with different viewpoints. Commentators have analyzed the story, the specific Arabic words used, and related traditions, all to try and figure out the true nature of this original prohibition. And the theories they've come up with range from the very literal to the deeply symbolic. So some interpretations say it was a literal physical tree. Some traditions point to things like wheat or grapes, symbols of earthly nourishment. Others see it as symbolic, representing the knowledge of good and evil, which was a burden humanity just wasn't ready for yet. A really profound interpretation identifies it as the Shajarat al-Hasad, or the tree of envy. The idea here is that Adam's mistake was in envying or wanting a higher spiritual rank that belonged to other beings, a rank that wasn't for him. And finally, the Qur'an itself tells us that Satan tempted them by calling it the tree of eternity and a kingdom that does not decay, playing on that desire for permanence.
This leads to a really critical theological question, especially when you consider Adam's status as a prophet. How could a chosen prophet of God commit a sin, a masiyah? Wouldn't that contradict the whole idea of prophetic infallibility? Or was his action something else entirely? This is where Islamic theology makes a vital distinction that totally reframes how we understand the event.
Right here, the source text gives us this crucial theological term, tark al-awla. It explains that Adam's action wasn't a violation of a strict legislative command, which would have been a sin. Instead, tark al-awla means leaving the better. The divine prohibition was advisory. It was guidance toward the best, or awla, course of action. By going near the tree, Adam chose a permissible path over a more excellent one. For someone of his high spiritual rank, that kind of choice is seen as an error or a slip, but it is not a sin in the legal sense of breaking a divine law. This concept is what preserves his prophetic stature, while still acknowledging that a mistake was made. Now, this distinction between an advisory command and a legislative one leads us straight into the most philosophically profound part of this entire analysis, the nature of divine will itself. I mean, think about it. If God's will is absolute, how can anyone, Adam, Iblis, or any of us, have the free choice to obey or disobey? How do you reconcile God's total sovereignty with human responsibility? The commentary explains this by breaking down two very distinct types of divine will, or irada. First, you have irada takwini, the creative or existential will. This is God's will to just bring something into existence, the command be. It is absolute. It's unstoppable. It can never be defied. The sun rising, the laws of physics, that's all an expression of this will. But then, second, you have irada tashdi'i, the legislative or prescriptive will. This is what God commands or desires for his creation to do, like praying or being just or avoiding evil. This will can be disobeyed because it operates in the realm of free will and moral choice. And the ultimate test case for this whole concept is the disobedience of Iblis, or Satan. Remember, when God commanded the angels to prostrate to Adam, Iblis refused. How could he possibly defy God's command if God's will is supreme? This section of the text right here gives us the key to solving what seems like a major paradox, one that has been at the center of theology for centuries. All right, let's walk through the logic here, step by step.
1. God's legislative will, the tashri' will, was for Iblis to prostrate. That was the divine command. 2. Iblis, using the free will he was given, chose to disobey that command out of arrogance. 3. God's creative will, the takwini will, had created a system that allows for the very possibility of free choice, and therefore the possibility of disobedience. The existence of Iblis's choice to disobey was willed creatively. So 4, Iblis's act was a direct violation of God's legislative will, but it happened within the bigger framework of his creative will, which allows for those kinds of choices to exist in the first place. To make this super abstract concept a bit more concrete, the commentary uses this great analogy. Imagine someone in charge tells you, go to the roof. Okay, so they have legislatively told you what they desire for you to do. They also created the house, the stairs, and gave you the legs to climb. They've shown you the way. But whether you actually take the step and go, or refuse and stay put, that's your choice. Your decision to disobey doesn't cancel out their command or their creative power. It just shows the freedom you were given within the reality they set up. And that brings us full circle, right back to this final critical question. We've just analyzed 2 different acts of disobedience. One was Adam's, which was a tark al-awla, a slip-up against an advisory command, and it was followed by immediate repentance and forgiveness. The other was from Iblis, a defiant, arrogant rejection of a clear legislative command rooted in pride that was met with the eternal condemnation we read about in our verse. So where exactly is that line? Is it in the nature of the command itself, the intention of the one who disobeys, or is it in the response that follows, repentance versus stubborn persistence? That is the question this deep dive leaves us to think about.